Welcome to the WildAg Podcast, where we'll serve as a connection point for landowners and conservation professionals who want to integrate conservation and agriculture. I'm Dr. Andrew Little, Professor of Landscape Ecology and Habitat Management and Extension Specialist at the University of Nebraska.
And I'm Nate Pflueger, Precision Ag Coordinator for Pheasants Forever and an avid outdoorsman with friends and family in my free time. Together, we'll work to bring you perspectives from both landowners and conservation professionals for discussions on soil, water, and wildlife in ag-dominated landscapes.
All right, welcome everyone to the WildAg Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Andrew Little. Joining me today is my co-host, Nathan Pflueger.
Hello, everyone.
You excited about getting this new podcast launched?
I'm really excited about it. It seems like a great opportunity to just bring in conservation professionals, scientists, landowners, and cover a wide variety of subjects that maybe there's a lot of misconceptions around or stuff that people just don't hear about normally.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, I think that's been one of the passions I've had in kind of getting this started. At least over the past few years, I've been here at the University of Nebraska and thinking about how do we really bridge agricultural production in an ag-dominated state like Nebraska and many of the other Midwestern states and beyond, and bridging that with conservation and finding those balances between production ag and conservation to ensure the sustainability of our natural resources for future generations.
Yeah, absolutely. And within my position is the Precision Ag Coordinator for Pheasants Forever. I get to work with landowners daily who have to balance those tasks, right? As far as growing a crop, producing something that's going to economically pay for their operation while still wanting to benefit wildlife somehow. So I think there's a lot of overlap there and a lot of different areas we can unpack.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, this is really exciting for me, and I think it's going to be a great venture here. So I guess wanted to kind of spend a little time today and just talk a little bit about ourselves so we can introduce the audience to who we are, a little bit about our background. So maybe I'll toss it to you first and kind of tell us a little bit about how you got into the position you're in and maybe a little bit about your upbringing.
Yeah. Absolutely. So when I was younger, I spent a lot of times outdoor hunting, fishing, sports. I had a younger sibling that was always with me, so we were getting into a lot of trouble. Just, I guess, two American boys out there breaking windows and coming home. And but no, it was really fun growing up. Even when I got into high school, I was big into sports and things like that. But I was still always wanting to be out hunting and fishing. So whenever we would have weekend practice or holiday sporting events or anything like that, the coaches were always a little frustrated with me because I was like, hey, this is my free time. I need to be out hunting and fishing. So that love just kind of grew and pointed me towards college, where I ended up going into range wildlife management out at Chadron.
Oh, cool.
So yeah, that's kind of the background for me. What about yourself?
Yeah, so grew up similar, loved hunting and fishing, grew up in Pennsylvania. That was where I originally started from, and then went on and decided I could actually pursue a degree in fisheries and wildlife, went to Penn State, did my BS degree there, and then moved on, did a tech position for about a year down in Virginia, and then I left and started my master's at Mississippi State University, working with Steve Damaris on some deer research. And then I finished that position up and took a 7-8 month position with Ducks Unlimited and work as a GIS intern for them. And then I transitioned into my PhD over at University of Georgia, working on wild turkeys with Dr. Mike Chamberlain. And I stayed around for a couple of years after that as a postdoc, working with Dr. Carl Miller, who's a world-renowned whitetail deer researcher. I'm now retired from the university, and then got the opportunity to come up here to Nebraska and start this position. So it's been a kind of whirlwind, but again, like you mentioned, the hunting and fishing, that really is kind of what birthed the passion in me. My dad also, he was a water quality specialist for the Department of Environmental Protection. And so I, inherently already had some kind of conservation components going into, my passion from just talking with him about things he did. And then obviously to where I'm at today, working really at this nexus of ag production and conservation. So
it sounds like you always had a close tie to wildlife as you were coming up through school. Did you find that hard to achieve, or was it easy? And the reason I ask that is because when I was coming up, especially after undergrad, it was hard in my opinion, to find a wildlife related job or kind of that next step.
Sure.
So I actually did some agronomy work in the meantime, and ended up going back to grad school and getting a master's in agronomy here from the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. So it kind of meshes my wildlife background and then that crop production background. But yeah, it seems like you were always tied to wildlife.
Sure. Yeah. Most of my times really tied to wildlife. I was very involved in 4-H and FFA as a kid, and then on up through high school. Eventually went on and got, it's a Keystone FFA degree within Pennsylvania for FFA, and then eventually my American FFA degree. And those were just basically components to, this kind of a passion for, ag systems and conservation. And then actually now one of the fun parts is I'm actually the superintendent for the environmental natural resources competition for Nebraska State FFA. So kind of come full circle, or I'm able to, bridge those things. And again, I obviously have that passion for conservation. Wildlife is kind of where I focus most of my time, my career. But really, ultimately, it boils down to, if I can't find that balance working with landowners, finding those opportunities for them to improve conservation, it definitely can be a challenge, especially, when you kind of have two different realms of ag production and conservation. So, but again, that's part of why I'm excited to have you join as a co-host, because of your background in that. And I think that's some of the exciting opportunities I foresee in the future with guests that, not necessarily just, wildlife focused folks. I think we really want to think about soil, water, and wildlife. And so bringing folks on that are tied to those other realms, and even bringing landowners on and talking about some of these conversations that are going on right now within our ag communities and such. So,
yeah, I agree 100%. And as the world moves towards a larger population, and I think it's going to be important that we find win-win solutions for soil, water, and wildlife. So, I guess what are you wanting this podcast to be, or what do you want to come out of it?
Yeah. I think that's a great question. So I've really thought a lot about with this podcast and kind of getting this launched, that I want to bring together individuals, guests, listeners, et cetera, around these topics of ag production and conservation, and really talk about various challenges within them. So for example, we have declining pheasant numbers. Pheasant numbers in Nebraska, or pheasants as a whole, are a pretty significant economic driver within portions of Nebraska. And so you obviously have to relate that back to the landowners in a state that's 97% privately owned. They're the ones that are going to have to make decisions that are going to best, benefit both worlds of, production for themselves and their family's livelihood. But then also, from that economic driver of having, pheasants, for example, out in your landscape, and, whether that be your own personal family, yourself that enjoys just going out there and hunting in the fall, or, you have people that come in and hunt your property, you lease your land out to hunting, those type of things. I want to talk about just a kind of variety of different topics that kind of tie back again to this, conservation and ag dominated landscapes. I think there's a huge opportunity there. And so, I guess maybe I'll share and see what your thoughts are.
Yeah, I think you really hit the nail on the head. There's a lot of competing interests out there when it comes to an acre of ground on the landscape. So I just want to bring in, like you said, a variety of folks who can speak to it from a different angle, right?
Sure.
Maybe shed some light on a situation that somebody in the city or the town might not really understand or really even know about. So I just think it's important to give a number of folks a voice on a specific topic.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I've thought about a lot coming into this podcast is really just letting people know that science and research is always evolving, right?
Oh, sure.
So
yeah.
Maybe you've heard something from one particular study, which could be true or it may not be true. But it's important to look at all the research as a whole and not one particular project, and really kind of dive into that a little more. So I think you could probably explain that a lot better than I could with your science background.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think that's, being able to share how do we do research and how does that apply into kind of this, conservation and ag dominated landscapes. That's really, so our lab, the Applied Wildlife Ecology and Spatial Movement Lab, or as we like to call it, the Awesome Lab, That's really our mission and our vision is focused on how do we find that balance for conservation and ag-dominated landscapes. And really within that, it's kind of a large umbrella. There's a lot of different things that go into it. And so research is a component of that. 60% of my job is extension. So I'm engaging with landowners across the state, biologists, et cetera. But then 40% of my job is research. And so what is that? How do these research projects come to be? What are the costs of these? How does that all come to be? Like, why are some of these projects maybe more expensive than other ones? And just kind of talking through some of those things. And then, like you said, I think the opportunity for a variety of topics around soil, water, and wildlife are really endless in my mind. There's so many different things that we could really explore. But again, one of the things I also really want to get out of this is that we can kind of help try to move the needle towards either new research projects that could be developed to address listener questions that are out there, but also thinking about ways that we can address some of the challenges that landowners may have in adoption of conservation programs. Again, things like could be taxes or could be other policy related things that may drive some of that decision making, market fluctuations. So essentially why are they making some of those decisions? I think it's important to hear from landowners, hear from those individuals that are producing crops, to kind of share, how am I kind of coming to this balance or finding that balance on my own lands? So.
Yep, absolutely. And I want this to be a podcast where people can write in, and you kind of touched on this, but share their ideas. Hey, I've heard a little bit about A, can you unpack that a little more? Or something like that, especially like predation and topics that there might be a lot of misconceptions around.
Sure, absolutely.
So folks, feel free to please reach out. And how can they get a hold of us? Yeah,
so folks can reach out. They can send questions into WildAg podcast at gmail.com. So WildAg podcast at gmail.com. And then we'll also be putting things out on our social media accounts, especially with the Awesome Lab. But definitely reach out, shoot us an email, and we're going to continue to expand on various address questions that folks have and expand this platform to really benefit landowners or conservation professionals, et cetera. So
awesome. Yeah. And as with my position, I'm out there working with landowners quite a bit. So I'll be fielding questions myself as they come up and just kind of storing them.
Sure, absolutely.
That might be a good podcast episode. Or again, if you're a landowner out there working with me, my contact information is on the Pheasants Forever website. So please feel free to reach out that way too.
No, that sounds great. I'm excited. I think it's going to be a fun podcast. All right. Sounds good. Well, thanks, Nathan. I appreciate it. And thanks, listeners. I look forward to launching this podcast.
Thanks, everyone. WildAg is part of the Natural Resources University Podcast Network. If you enjoy this podcast, please leave us a review so others can find us and tune in.
And we want to hear from you. You can submit questions or topic suggestions to us at wildagpodcast@gmail.com. That's WILDAG podcast@gmail.com. Thanks for listening.